They have vast sums of money in banks you've never heard of. And they control our governments. They control the governments of Europe. They control the government of the United States. They control the government of Israel. They control the government of Iran. They tried to control the government of Russia, China, and everybody else. So anybody who tries to get out from underneath them gets the hammer. They always get the horns. And much of our history of the world and our own history here in the U.S., and even our monetary history, as we've discussed today, relative to Bitcoin, the Fed, and everything else, isn't really what you might think it actually is. Because we have their control system is our dollar out there in the world. The offshore dollar system, as Chris will point out, is 20 times the domestic dollar market. Because of that, we've never really been free here in America of our old colonial masters that we supposedly fought a war of independence from in 1776 to 81. They've controlled our markets through trade imbalances, and eventually through giving us their central bank model. We were the Iran, for lack of a better term, in 1913. If you've heard the idea that the only reason we're going after Iran is because they don't have a central bank that the quote-unquote Rothschilds control. This is the landscape. So who's at the table right now? It is Trump and the sovereigntists in America, some of whom are our greatest enemies here in this room. That would be some of the major banks, the DOD, even parts of the intelligence departments, and even parts of the
Fed?
No, and especially the Federal Reserve, because they're the ones who actually have the power to fight the people that we're actually trying to win our independence from. If you accept that premise, and that's a big premise to accept, and it was a big premise for me to accept in 2021 when I started to make this idea click in my head, because I was like everybody, like almost every Bitcoiner you ever met. The hell with the Fed. They're evil. But what if they're the victim and not the villain? What if also, once we understand that they've been the victim, they're also the mechanism by which to become the hero? Hero, victim, villain is the essential triad of all narrative. And only viewing players at the table through one of those lenses leaves you with an incomplete picture. So from everybody's perspective, they are always the hero of their own story. And ultimately, they can be the villain on the other side, and they can always be the victim of somebody else. So what if the Fed has been a captured pawn since after World War II and the rise of the euro-dollar market, setting the cost of capital for the United States? And what if what Trump is actually doing with tariffs and this and everything he's trying to do, and bringing Bitcoin on board, and the stable coins and everything else, what if all of that is to reverse the flow of capital as opposed to having the money go out and us pay interest on debt, have it all come back and stay here? And what if I told you that he would not have been able to even attempt to do any of this if Jerome Powell hadn't switched the world from a LIBOR-based standard to a SOFR-based standard?
Which is the LIBOR and SOFR are
they are the debt, one of what used to be the debt indexing rate of the dollar for the entire world. Every debt contract in the world up until 2022 was written against LIBOR.
To Tom's point, think of how hilarious it is. Do we know what LIBOR stands for? London Interbank Overnight Rate. Wait, what?
Offered rate.
Sorry. Wait, we're basing U.S. mortgages, corporate bonds, high yield bonds, muni bonds on a rate in London? Like, think of how ridiculous that concept is.
But that's what it was. Okay.
For a century.
Well, only since 1984.
But
and then the Plaza Accord in 1985, where we rigged all the currency markets, and then the crash in 1987.
High level, gentlemen. High level.
And the S&L crisis, and it's all part of that same process.
The Bank of England setting the cost of money has been since 1814.
In effect, I mean, but with LIBOR, and I'll pass it over to Paul in just a second. But when we moved off of LIBOR, which was an agreed-upon rate by 18 City of London banks, not the American economy, and we switched over to a SOFR standard in 2022, where SOFR is the indexing rate, and that's a market rate based on what happens in our repo markets and our money markets. What you do every day, the demand for money within our economy is what sets the rate. The Fed actually now has to, in effect, has almost ceded monetary policy to you.
Define SOFR real quick.
So SOFR is the secured overnight financing rate. It is a market-driven rate of what actually happens in the money markets every day. Everybody goes out and the banks all bid, they buy and sell against SOFR in order to buy money what they need on a regular basis. And as long as that rate shows no stress on a daily basis relative to what the Fed is setting at the Fed funds rate, as long as those two things are in conjunction, there's no stress in our markets. Well, guess what? In 2022, when Powell started raising rates, how many of you thought that the world was going to crash because they went above 1%? Zero Hedge told you it was going to happen. Peter Schiff told you it was going to happen. Every Austrian economist in the world told you it was going to happen, except this one. I said, no, that's not what's going to happen, because Chris and I know you and I were talking about this back then. This is serious. Like, I had Chris on the podcast back then, the Gold, Goats, and Guns podcast. We talked about this. And I said, Chris, we're going to finally find out what our economy can handle for the first time in 60 years. And now we're in the war because we're winning. And that's why they're threatening us with nuclear fire. That's why they won't give up in Ukraine. That's why they won't give up in Iran. That's the layout. That's where it starts. Now let's talk about whether or not we're going to win.
So we can win. How do we, Paul? I mean, like, what do you think about this? Like, we just set the stage.
Yeah, well, am I on?
You got flick it up.
All right, we just talked about LIBOR, and that does make sense from the perspective of if you understand that the London banks are running the world, right? So if they're setting the rate for the world, that tells you that they're in charge, right? So they're in charge, and we, the United States, and others have been the strong arm of that colonial empire. Mm-hmm. So winning for us Bitcoiners, psychopaths, looks like destroying these London banks, breaking these colonial ties. We never won in 1776, right? We never won our independence. We have been, and I think I grew up not understanding this. I think most of us, and there's many of us in the room that still don't understand this, and I'm still on my journey to learn it even more. We've never been independent. We've always been in this fight to separate ourselves from the central banks of the world. As Tom said, everyone who's tried to do that is either dead or sanctioned, or an enemy of the state, debanked, etc. We now have a president, the entire family has been debanked. That entire family is looking at the Fed, looking at the big banks of the world saying, what the F? Mm-hmm. So, we'll see how this plays out, but winning means using tools like Bitcoin, using tools like lawfare, and using your individual opting into sovereignty, because you are actually the most powerful people in this game, whether you get it or not. You opting out of their system kills their system. That's why we bought Bitcoin.
So you've heard Bitcoin is the new gold rush by now. As world leaders on all sides have endorsed it as the future of money, and now you're looking to get started, we'll show you how. It's actually easier than you think. First, go to your nearest ByteFederal ATM and turn your cash to coin. ByteFederal has over 1,200 locations around the country with the highest daily limits. Go to our website, ByteFederal.com, to find the nearest ATM to you. Log in to any wallet, then create an account, deposit your U.S. cash, and instantly convert it to Bitcoin. That's it. We are the only U.S. manufacturer and operator in the Bitcoin ATM industry, and our U.S.-based live customer service is second to none. Go on, give it a whirl, and don't get left behind. Click the link below.